So one thing that's interesting about McCulloch v. Maryland is that nobody knows how to pronounce McCulloch's name.
I say McCullough, but I'm from the South. Maybe I'm... McCulloch, is that what other people... McCullough versus Maryland is what I've always heard it as.
McCulloch versus Maryland.
Let's go with McCullough. Yeah.
I prefer and was taught to say McCulloch versus Maryland. So that's how I'll say it.
The case evolves from the War of 1812. The United States goes severely into debt as a result of that. The state banks were starting to charge incredibly high interest rates to the federal government in order to have it borrow money.
So the United States chartered a bank.
The original branch opens in Philadelphia.
And then another one in Baltimore.
And Congress starts dealing almost exclusively with this branch in terms of commercial transactions.
And the Maryland officials said, nowhere in the Constitution does it say that the United States government can charter a bank.
Maryland decided to tax the bank.
So Maryland enacted a law that taxed the second bank of the United States.
The state of Maryland tries to collect on this fee, and the trustee of the bank in Baltimore,
McCullough, said we're not going to pay the tax, which was $15,000.
$15,000, which of course was a ton of money.
He says, I am not paying no daggum tax. I'm the frickin' head of the branch of the Second National Bank of the United States of America.
And as a result, this lawsuit commences.
Does Maryland have the right to tax a United States entity? The Maryland Supreme Court said it does, because nowhere in the Constitution did it say that the United States government could charter a bank, and therefore the bank was illegal.
At the level of the state of Maryland, of course Maryland wins. But eventually it works its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. It's important to remember that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in 1819 was still John Marshall, and he's a big Federalist. He believes in the power of a centralized national government.
There's a two-part question that comes to the Supreme Court, comes to Chief Justice John Marshall. And the first question is whether or not Congress can even charter the bank. The powers of the federal government are what are called enumerated powers, which means they have to be spelled out explicitly in the Constitution.
They have 17 enumerated powers, and these include the power to regulate commerce, the power to coin money.
But there's nothing in there that says Congress has the authority to create a bank.
John Marshall listened to Daniel Webster, who would become very famous later. And Daniel Webster said there were implied powers in the Constitution. In Article 1, Section 8,
that says Congress has the authority to pass any laws that are necessary and proper
instruments for government
to carry out its enumerated responsibilities.
So the necessary and proper clause gives Congress the ability to establish a bank to be able to coin money and regulate commerce.
Marshall then says, under the assumption that this bank is now constitutional, the next question is whether or not a state can tax a federal institution.
He points to Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution, and he says, if two laws conflict, if a state law and a federal law conflicts, the federal law supersedes. It's called the Supremacy Clause. Federal law always wins out.
The federal government is superior to the states, and the power to tax
is the power to destroy.
Could actually destroy any institution. I mean, you could levy a tax that is so high that no corporation, no bank, no institution could survive. And Marshall said, from a logical standpoint, that's just stupid. That's absurd. There's no way that an inferior level of government should ever be able to destroy a superior level of government.
Marshall firmly establishes the strength of the federal government in relation to the states.
And as a result, the bank was legitimate and Maryland could not tax it.
The case was not really about Maryland versus a bank. It was really about state government versus national government.